Welcome back to Fox 5 on the Hill. President Donald Trump's negotiating style has proven critical for his foreign policy, in particular Mexico and China, a couple of the latest examples of his deal-making style. But what about his style is working and what is not? Peter Johnston is an author and an expert in negotiations. He advises governments, he advises political parties and corporations. His latest book is right here, Weapons of Peace. Peter, thank you for coming in and joining us this morning. So you spell out a case here that is very interesting for a lot of reasons, because for a long time there was always this conversation, what would it be like to have a businessman in the White House? Well, now we know. What has Donald Trump brought into the White House from a negotiating style that he used to use to affect and sometimes not affect when he was just running the Trump organization?
Mr. Trump's book, Tom, was called The Art of the Deal, written in the 1980s.
Which he didn't write.
Which apparently he didn't write. He had input into, and it was based on positional bargaining and the art of the deal, as opposed to the art and science of the deal, which is where we've come in the last 30 years. There's a lot of science to back up what the most effective approaches are.
Now, one of the things that you've identified in the way Donald Trump runs negotiations is that the risk gets pushed over to the other side of the table. Is that something you see consistent in how this White House is operating?
Absolutely, and I would say specifically how Mr. Trump negotiates is he insulates himself personally from anything that might go wrong in terms of his dealings. So with China and Mexico and trade in general, if the Trump organization were a public organization, he would, and it was listed, he would probably take a very different approach to these negotiations. And if it exchanged goods and services across borders, he probably would take a very different approach.
Okay, so what's the advantage of that? What's the advantage in getting the person on the other side of the table to take most of the risk? And by the way, why would the other person on the other side of the table take the most of the risk? Aren't you supposed to want to work out an equitable deal where both sides are equally exposed?
Right. Mr. Trump takes a positional approach to negotiation, is what we call it, bilaterally, and he tends to stake out a position that's extreme. If I were buying your car, I would say if it's worth $25,000, I'd say, here's $5,000. How's that? And you'd come back and say 35. You're going to be very much driven by what I do in terms of my tone and demeanor. And that's as opposed to taking more of a multilateral, problem-solving approach to negotiation.
So it seems like it's worked in some areas, like with, the Mexico-Canada trade agreement. It seems like it's worked with NATO as well to get the other countries to start, spending their fair share of the bill. Hasn't worked so far that much with North Korea. What's different about how he's handled himself with North Korea than maybe some of these other examples where it has worked?
Well, North Korea's a complex situation, but I would say that one of the challenges Mr. Trump has is sequencing in his negotiations strategically. So you almost had to, I would have said, take a choice right up front. Do I want North Korea as a deal, or do I want trade with China as a deal? Because China's a critical player in coalition building to influence and pressure North Korea. And since Mr. Trump has taken an aggressive approach on trade, the Chinese, guess what? They're less inclined to be helpful on North Korea. So you have to pick your spots, Tom.
Is the fact that his opponents now know a lot of this about his style a liability now? Because they can come to the table like North Korea did and said, oh, by the way, we not only want what we want, but we want more.
Absolutely, and they've seen him back off what he wants. But, Mr. Trump has a lot of positives going for him. Where they need to work, is on problem solving. With Mexico and China, they have to understand the problems that those two countries face in saying yes to a deal.
The book, Weapons of Peace, this is an inside account of really some fascinating behind-the-scenes negotiating information. Well worth the read. We appreciate you coming in. The book is by Peter Johnston, available wherever you find fine books, as we like to say in the book trade. We'll be right back. Maryland Congressman Jamie Raskin from Maryland. He'll be here. Fox 5 News on the Hill continues right after this.